Welcome to Cafe Technica.
Hey guys, this is Tom Roberto, your technology shaman. This is another episode of Cafe Technica, and today we have a very special guest, Christopher White. He is a music theory teacher at UMASS Amherst and the author of Music in the Data. Chris, please introduce yourself and say hello.
Hey, it's great to be here. Chris White. I'm a associate professor of music theory at UMass Amherst, where I teach our graduates and undergraduates in the ins and outs of how music is made.
Awesome. We were just having a conversation prior to getting started here, but some of the reason that I find, your history and kind of take on things is over the last several episodes and in my career in technology, I've found that more people that come from the performing arts or theater tend to find themselves into these technology roles because they think very creatively and they can apply technology in really unique ways. So I would love to hear kind of some of your history and how you got into this. And, you're very unique in the way that you're music focused, but also very science and technology focused.
Yeah, thanks. So when I was a kid, both of my parents were chemists, analytical chemists, and they were pushing me they were pushing me towards the sciencey side of things. And I was kind of a little of a rebellious kid, and I was like, I'm going to do music instead of science. And so my identity became very connected to the arts and theater, and I played piano. And when it came time to go to college, I was like, I'm going to do a music degree. And my parents were like, oh, okay, fine. And so like it's sort of funny that I was pushing myself towards this artistic side, but then when I actually have the time and leeway to like create a career for myself, I end up swooping back to that other side into the like, super technical computational cognition sciencey side of music.
It definitely comes through. And like if I've got the kind of crux of your book, it was really applying music theory principles, right? And like all of that creative science that goes into making music and how that's built into some of the like data analytics and data science stuff where like if you were to talk to a data scientist, they're very much technology focused, right? So they can talk to you about databases and queries and things like that, but you were actually applying a different trades mentality in there. And I think that's amazing. Like that's an incredible way to think.
That's so sweet of you to say. I mean, I think that a lot of our thinking tends to get siloed into different modes of thought. Like you're either a creative or you're a technical person. And folks that are on the technical and hard sciencey side have this very scientific approach, like the scientific method approach you test something and there's a clear answer. Whereas folks on the humanities and creative side are like, well, what even is truth? And so like, if I have a unique perspective, it's that if I'm in a room with a bunch of people who have one perspective, I'm like, but have you thought about? And then if I'm in the room with the other perspective, I do the exact opposite. Like, so my book is saying, all right, if we're going to use we can bring a humanities perspective to a data science, an interpretive perspective to a data science method, but also we can use data science methods to talk about more creative and interpretive endeavors.
It's a perfect fit for kind of what I'm out there trying to preach and what I've been doing in my career. Because so for those of you that don't know, and I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast, or I don't actually say this a lot when I talk to people for business, I actually was a music major. I was very much into music when I was a kid. I wanted to be a music teacher. I was on track to do that. I had taken all the music theory courses and things. And like, it's one of those things where you kind of shift focus and you go, well, I need to make money as an adult, so I'm gonna look at a business or I'm gonna look at something else, right? And I went that way. But one of the first real kind of careers that I started with was with a company called Creative Realities, and the two founders who were on the podcast came from theater backgrounds. Like they were used to putting on Broadway shows and that kind of thing. And it was a very unique environment. That company will never be able to be created again the way it was. But I find that mentality and exactly what you're talking about taking principles from like other skills, right? More creative humanity type skills and applying it gets very unique results. It actually spawns like entire different verticals within technology and businesses and things like that. So like, tell me more about some of the things that you're using from a technology side that cross-pollinates the other way, that maybe you're using it within classrooms and like, the students and taught, like how does one impact the other?
Okay. So yeah, there's a few, so in the classroom, you get a lot of, and I'm sure this resonates with your experience. You get a 17 or 18-year-old, 19-year-old coming into a music program, and their understanding of music and expression is that it's magic. That there's that like you just have to have a heart for it, and if you're touched by the inspiration, music comes out. And there's certainly a truth to that, but there's also a science to what makes music work and what makes people respond in a certain way to certain kinds of music. And so my husband likes to, when he describes what I do to other people, say that I take the magic out of music, because this is exactly what I do. It's like, oh, you think what you're doing is magic? No, let me show you let me show you the statistics for why you feel happy at this moment, or like that kind of thing, or like why this moment in somebody like a Ludwig Beethoven or a Florence Price, like why that particular moment gives you chills. There's an explanation, and it's a statistical explanation for why that's giving you chills.
No, you're right. There's like a science. It's like that with any trade, right? Like there is a science to anything, including, creative stuff, right? Like there's a science to certain art. There's a science to business. There's a science to building relationships. I feel like that is something that I think not a lot of people think about. And again, like my mission, right, is to cross-pollinate the world before the internet and analog thinking and very like, nuts, bolts, acoustic guitar, and then take it to, okay, now everybody's sampling and they're doing, AI, and they're like, it's a very different world. And I feel like, people that grew up like Gen Xers, millennials, like they knew both sides to a certain extent, but now you've got a whole generation of people that really don't understand that, and nobody talks about it. So it's an interesting kind of mix. So let me ask you this: like you're obviously science focused and you're technology focused. Like how does that go in your personal life? Like, are you a very technically driven person at home?
No. I mean, so my walk with technology and these sort of more statistical and hard science methods has always been to solve a particular problem, not for the sake of the technology.
Sure.
And like I think that does sort of like align with what you're talking about with the relationship that millennials, older millennials and Gen Xers have with technology, where it's like it's not the water that you swim in; it's a thing that you have to adopt in order to create something. So, like when I was trying to choose a dissertation topic, I wanted to write about this early 20th century composer named Alban Berg, serialist, as in like it's that bleep bloop 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 stuff that people complain about, right? But it's the kind of thing that I also love, and what I loved about it was that it when I listen to his music, you sort of hear traces of keys, traces of tonal centers, of like it sort of smells like F major for a moment. And while not really being an F major. And so I was trying to write about this, and I wasn't finding a lot of of good ways to get about it. But then I found like an algorithm that could tell you how much percent it believes that something is in, let's say, F major. And so that was my first step into this side of things. And so the reason that I got into it was to try to explain my experience with this music. And so, like, I wouldn't say that I'm out there as a acolyte of technology for technology's sake, but I do like to advocate for using technology when it solves a problem.
No, that makes sense. I was actually just looking for a different composer. So there's a guy, Richard Harvey, who had a lot of music that came out around the 80s. And it had that same sort of feel, right? Like it was very technology focused and like, synth sounds and things like that. And like, actually, he was fairly famous for having a song that appeared on like a Sesame Street and a Mr. Rogers type like outpost thing, and it was like very like it invokes a lot of like nostalgia when you hear when you hear some of the songs. I'll have to send it to you. But it was the same thing, right? Like that was a very specific use case for technology, right? Like I used to work with somebody that said it's like hammers searching for nails. Right? Like you have to have the problem before you can start using the tool. You can't start with the tool and then go the other way, because the hammer doesn't know that you know what a home is. It just knows how to beat the nail into wood, right? Like it's very purpose driven.
Yes. And like to connect that back to the Gen X millennial thing.
Yeah.
I was born 1982. When were you born?
1982.
Yeah, right. No, we're exactly on that like line.
Yeah.
We learned card catalogs in elementary school and then had to.
Do we just help us, the men? Yeah.
There's this and now I'm going to show my humanities side. There's this concept from Martin Heidegger, called where he talks about hammers specifically, as like you never think about why you're using a hammer until the hammer breaks. And then you start to have to understand what the hammer's for, how the hammer works. And so those of us who have to use technology in a way that like that is intentional, where it's like janky and we have to make it work, like we're making the hammers, then we understand what it's for and how it works a little bit better than if you just like come into a world of hammers that always work for you.
I totally agree with you. And I get exactly what you're saying. So like, let me ask you this. So you've obviously put a lot of thought and you put a lot of energy into kind of identifying some of these things. Do you find that there's some universal truths between like humanities and science where you say, when you analyze things in this way, or when you're looking for these results, like these are sort of universal truths that apply whether you're a scientist or whether you're a musician?
Give me an example of what you're thinking about as a universal truth in that.
Well, so like I've heard from numerous folks that you'll talk to a lot of business analysts and they can't quite put a phrase to it, but they know that like customer journey and the emotions that are invoked when you walk into a store and things are very important to technology, to the point of sale, to how a customer interacts with a brand, right? It's very much the Apple approach of like when you hold the device, you have this emotional connection to it, right? But then you'll talk to theater folks and they totally understand that, because it's like, well, we have the same truth. When you go to a show and you're experiencing that show, if it resonates with you emotionally, people are going to remember that, right? But if you've watched this really great show with great effects and excellent actors and singers, but the storyline doesn't connect, that same universal truth like is true, right? Like you just won't have that same connection to the, like you have to understand how people work, I guess is another way to put it.
Yeah, I'll say that one thing that pops up on both sides of the divide is the role of the body as an important mediator of really whatever you're talking about. Like if you're talking about why somebody hears a chord the way they do, it's not just a raw acoustical signal that's like floating through the air that can be reduced to zeros and ones. Even though when you do it as a computational experiment or something like that, or as a psychological experiment, you are reducing it to a series of zeros and ones and like very abstract symbols. It always comes back to the bodily experience. And the same thing happens when you're talking through an interpretive perspective. It's just you are reordering the elements there. You're starting from the bodily experience and then trying to describe what's going on in the more abstract world. That's one thing that comes to mind, is like this thing that I see on both sides of the divide.
Yeah, that makes sense. So actually, that's kind of a good dovetail. So, how do you think AI is now starting to interpret that? Because now you have full generative AI that is not only creating text and things like that, but it can create melodies, it can create different sounds, and it can create music in a certain way. Like, how do you find that AI is now impacting that?
Yeah, music is an interesting inflection point for AI, I think. Not that I'm biased or anything, but because when you think about what text-based AI is doing, what do you use ChatGPT for? You use ChatGPT to edit an email, or like write a prompt for a resume or something like that. Like there's often a very clear task that's associated with it, with information that has to get from one side to another. You're like, here's the information. ChatGPT, can you make it make sense in a paragraph form or something like that?
Yeah.
Right. So there's and the same thing with like voice replication. Like when Drake used the Tupac that Tupac filter, right, in that track that Tupac's estate asked him to take down. So for anybody that's listening that isn't like tuned into the Kendrick Drake thing, one of the volleys back and forth between these two rappers was Drake using a AI voice filter to record a verse in the voice of Tupac, who's been dead for several years. And so a voice filter is also communicating specific information. Like it either sounds like somebody or it doesn't. And so much of AI is around that. And then when we get uncomfortable with it is when we're trying to use it as some sort of expressive medium. Like when AI writes a poem and you're like, oh, I kind of feel weird about using AI poetry, right? Yeah. Or when that half a second when that track went around TikTok last year that folks thought was Drake for a little bit, and then it turned out not to actually be Drake. It was somebody else. And you're like, oh, that skeezes me out. I was right. And the thing about music is that you don't very infrequently use music to communicate information. Music is not a medium that you can like take information. You don't learn the weather from music, right? You don't compose an email with music, right? It's all about expression. And so when you get a computer creating AI generated music, you're immediately struck by the expressive problem, by the idea that it's not that there's no expression underneath it, or that no human on the other side has put in their own experience into it.
Yep.
And like that doesn't matter when it's a resume, because the resume is there just to communicate information. That's not what's happening with music. It does matter whether there's a human with expressive capacity on the other side.
No, I totally agree with you, because again, like, tying this back to like a business aspect, I used to work with somebody that said, data doesn't lie. Data doesn't lie, right? And my words back to him were always, data lies all the time. Like, you can absolutely spin analytics and statistics to tell any story you want, right? It's all in the style and performance that you have with how you're putting together that argument or that analysis, et cetera. And kind of what you're saying is similar, right? Like the data and the tones and the notes that you're playing aren't really making up the music. It's really in the style and the performance. And some of these technology tools, they can put together a lot of things that make sense and would sound, quote unquote, good, but there's no style to the AI, right? Like it's not originality, it's emulation of originality, and people can pick up on that very quickly. And I feel like they can do that the same way on, technology and data. Like if you're sitting in front of a customer and you're presenting something, they're going to immediately pick up on whether or not you're genuine.
Yeah. I think that there's two separate questions here also that are worth teasing apart. One is whether we can identify because I think that there's probably a world in the future where AI gets so good that we won't be able to tell.
You won't know.
I think
That's right.
I think you're absolutely right that right now you can tell the difference between AI generated content but there will be we should prepare ourselves for a time that's right that we won't be able to tell whether something's genuine or not.
So you know what's interesting to me about that? Sorry to cut you off.
No.
What's interesting to me about it and what you're doing is I believe that there needs to be more study and more students in the thought of learning about style, learning about what makes that original, right? And so like I was having a conversation with somebody about AI recently, and I was saying, there's not enough study of the use of AI in humanities to teach it about what makes humans human. Right. And there's a project called Pi.ai that does exactly that, but it's one company, right? Like there needs to be more of that education. And I feel like that's what you're doing. Like you're teasing out some of that education.
You said it way better than I could have. That is because I think that if you look out there at what folks are writing, there are people that are writing about like humanity and AI. But it's very new. This is awfully new. I say that. However, people have been talking about the distance between what it means to be a human and what it means to be a artificial intelligence since the beginning of the computer. There's this fantastic essay by Ada Lovelace, who was a assistant to Charles Babbage, who was the first person to describe a computer in the 1840s. Yeah. And in her notes to that, she has a couple of paragraphs about how this can never be like a human, because all the computer is ever going to be able to do is take the things that go into it and reorder it.
Yeah.
And that's the same freaking thing that we're talking about right now, is that the difference between a human and an AI is that there's some different capacity for creation in humans versus AI. And what computers are doing are reordering, and what we're doing is somehow more synthetic.
Yeah. No, look, this is the most interesting topic that you can have, because to your point, this argument has existed on some level forever, right? Like way before computers, way before anything. And even when electronic, right, like analog electronics, like synthesizers came out, people were like, well, that'll never replace, somebody playing the electric guitar or you know what I mean? And like, sure, fast forward years, you can get very close to that, if not better, right? Like you look at the music that's created today. So I think it's a very important topic. And I think that my interest is really in your education, your use of creativity and humanities in AI is really going to teach it to do the things that we're hoping it'll do, right? But like without that education, I don't think it'll ever get there.
Yeah, and we do need our students to be aware of and to think critically about like what AI does well and what it doesn't, in order to like make them good users of this technology, and not be duped. Right.
Well, so you bring up a great point, right? Like transition now, because I'm going to be selfish and I always go this way in the podcast. So like, let's talk about generational divide, because you and I come from that same year, same. We're called Centennials, which is between Gen X and Millennials, right? So we don't even have our own generation. But so like, how do you find students coming in today? Because you're dealing with the 18, 19, 20-year-old person. They're very much, they've grown up with the internet, they've grown up with iPods, they knew that's what they came from. How do you find that they're coming in? Like, where do you see differences? Where do you see pros, cons? Like, talk to me about that, because you deal with it on a day-to-day.
Yeah, and this is a thing that I think about a lot, but I don't have a great answer for, except maybe a couple of little vignettes.
Love it.
So I've gotten if I say, hey, can you upload an image of this and like of this document, what I intend is for them to go into the file directory, export PDF, and then send me that. But the intuition of a lot of our students now is to take out their phones, take a picture of the computer screen, and then send me that on their phone, and that is so wild, right? It's so different than the way that I think about it.
Yep.
It's also worse, right? Like it's a worse quality.
Sure.
And it sort of shows the way that they think about the technology differently. That like that what their phone does is take a picture. Like if you want a picture, you use your phone. You don't like ask the application that you're using how you make an image. Now on the other side, I am, and I suspect you are, very like I think that the internet is my friend. I have feelings towards the internet. Like the internet to me is like internet circa 2007, when everything was rosy, and Homestar Runner was the funniest thing on there, and like and Barack Obama was extolling the virtues of Facebook.
Sure.
Our kids now do not believe that. The students now are extremely skeptical of the internet, and they're right, and I'm wrong. Yeah. And so like they have better intuitions about navigating. What are we on? Web 3 point, whatever we're on. Right? They have better intuitions about navigating the electronic world than I do.
It's interesting you say that, right? Because I used to do a technology shamanism course for a professor that I actually went to high school with. She taught marketing. And one of the things that I used to say was when we were kids and the internet first was kind of coming to be, there was an exceptionally creative thought around using it, right? Like if you remember the websites we went to, they really didn't have a point. It was just, let's put a website up because we can, and then we'll figure out how to make use of it later, right? So there was this like playfulness to what we use. And I think you just tied it better than I could have said it. Like it was very warm and fuzzy. And like we remember that with nostalgia. Like it was so much fun to go and play with all the little trinkets on the websites when they had no real purpose, right? Today, I feel like the kids don't have that because they grew up with it. They know all the bad things. They've seen, it's become very like sterile and sciencey. On the flip side, what you said was, hey, they're willing to just take a picture on their phone and send it to us. And we're very used to like post-production, like making things with applications and files and hierarchy and things. And if you look at them, they're like, 11,000 unread emails in a Gmail account that has no folders and everything's just tagged. And it's like, well, that's very playful. We'll figure that out. Like, we have search. And like for us, it's like, holy moly, what? Like, that's not good. So like, I feel like maybe that's some of this like generational thing where like we come from the world where it was like, well, it was warm and fuzzy to use certain things, but other things were off topic, like, we're hardened, right? And now that's kind of flipped on end with us. And the things that we thought were very like hardened are now creative, and they're kind of hardened on some of the other stuff. So like, it's interesting the way you're putting it. There's something there. I'll have to think about that.
Yeah. I often wonder what folks are going to complain about us.
Right.
Yeah. Because like there's plenty of tropes about like what we complain about higher parents' generation. But like there's going to be something that we do wrong, and I'm not sure that maybe they already know. But I'm curious what
I feel like we've done everything wrong. Have you seen Action Park yet?
We've done. I mean, we've done we have. I mean, we ruined the world, but
yeah.
But like we were very cheerful doing it, and remained.
Oh yeah, I was very happy.
Yeah,
it's so like, true, man.
It's like we burned the world down, but like at least we weren't annoying.
No, yeah, it was very fun doing it. Like now we've got to rebuild, and I don't know how to do that. That's actually very funny. You should actually check out. I don't know if you've seen Action Park. It's a documentary about like a New Jersey theme park, but it revolves around our generation, the '80s, and like how kids were then, and like how we were so dangerous, and nobody really thought about it. It's very apropos for how you describe.
I'm gonna check it out.
So. Yeah, you'll have to check it out. So how do you feel about the kids, like creativity wise though? Like, okay, so they don't have the warm and fuzzies about certain technology, but like, are they more creative, less creative? Like, how do you find that?
I think that creativity is one of the stable factors in what I've seen in my students over the last, and I've been I don't know, I've been teaching for 15 years now or so.
Yeah.
That's been stable. And sometimes it surprises me because the older I get, the more get off my lawn I become. And
Yeah.
but then I'll be like, kids these days, and then I'll come into class and they will totally bowl me over with their creativity.
That's cool.
I also see a lot of students pendulum swinging in the other direction technologically. When I was in school, lots of people, almost everybody was using notation software for it was just like the Sibelius was taking off, Finale was taking off, and everybody was adopting it. And now you see people opting out.
Yep.
Like the people who were writing on pen to paper for their music assignments were the people who hadn't adopted it yet, who just hadn't wrapped their minds around the technology. Now there's people who've totally wrapped their minds around the technology and are just like, I'm not going to I'm going to opt out.
Going back to pen and paper. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have several students who just don't like to use music notation software. They're perfectly fluent in it, but they would rather do their composing and writing on paper.
I love that, right? Like that to me, that is exactly what I stand for. That like at some point the technology has to plateau, and you have to envision that like, okay, now human beings are going to have to figure out where it's appropriate to apply it and where maybe it was like we were stretching just because we liked technology and we had the warm and fuzzies with it, but maybe the other stuff might have been a little better, right? Like I feel like that's an amazing thing that you're seeing that I don't think a lot of people see, because I've had this conversation with numerous people now, and some people will say exactly what you're saying, which is there are some universal truths to people, and that the younger generation is not that different from us. And then other people will say, oh, there's this huge generational divide, and kids these days, and it's like, yeah, like the whole get off my lawn thing. Like, there's always going to be some old timer that says it's not the same, right?
I will say that one of the ways that I was really impressed with our students was around the Gaza protests in the spring. That I had seen over the past couple of years a lot of fatigue and apathy, which sort of I saw it like sanding down creative acts, coming from the pandemic, that the pandemic had just like really and when I saw what our students were doing, regardless of how you feel about it, there was a lot of effort and thoughtfulness that went into it, and I was just impressed of what they did. Again, neither positive nor negative value there. It just what they did was really creative and thoughtful and had a lot of heart. And that was I don't know, that when I looked at that, I was like, yeah, I guess that's a thing that would have been true 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago about
1969 in Vietnam, right? Like
exactly.
Same thing.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Again, I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because I just what you do and your experience with this is very, very much in line with what I've been saying, and it's so true across whether you're talking business, technology, humanities. So let me ask you this: is there any frameworks for thinking that you can give the audience? Kind of how to analyze things, because I think that's kind of where you come from, right? Like there's a way to look at things, and that there's a style to looking at things. Like, do you have a framework that you subscribe to? Is it like minimalism or always start with why, or like is there a way to look at things kind of in your world that would help people?
This is such a good question and such a big question.
It's huge.
So three things. I think that I try to ask my students, and I try to hold myself to this too. The first thing that you do is you look for, see whether there's a data-driven, whether there's an evidence-based way of attacking a problem. So numbers, graphs. If that's available, do it. and get your hands dirty in the data. Because also, if you go online and you find something on medium.com that gives you a graph that says that X is definitely causing Y, it's like, okay, but let's look at the actual data and open up an Excel spreadsheet and figure it out if you're really interested in this question. Don't take somebody else's analysis on face value. Get into the data.
Yeah.
That's one. Two, most of the time, big questions are not new questions. And people have been asking them for hundreds of years. That like it's such a rewarding task to do the here and now, and then take a step back and then go crack open a couple of history books and see or philosophy books, right, and see what like folks were talking about this in the 17th century. In Greece, right? Like a lot of things have been talked about for a very long time, and there's a long history of these questions. And then also the third thing is that you're almost never right. Like at the end of the day, you have to keep yourself open to being corrected by when you put your idea out in the world and somebody's like, listen to that criticism and then revise and resubmit your idea. Yeah.
You have to be your own person almost, right? Like, and accept the consequences. What's one of the favorite questions you've received recently from one of your students? Like, what did they ask where you were like, wow, I was blown away by that?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Let me think about this. One of somebody asked me in my counterpoint class. So I taught counterpoint is for the non-musicians that might be listening to this. Is just like it's an extremely specific study of how you write notes against other notes to make it sound good and to keep it independence of two different vocal lines that are singing at the same time. So I'm teaching a bunch of our composition majors this, and somebody asked like whether I liked music, and I was like, yeah, I guess so. And then but it like took me, it like put me back on my heels because they were like genuinely asking like what my experience with music is.
Yeah.
And then I was like, do you like music?
Yeah.
And they also had way more complicated answers to that question, right? Because why it was such a good question is that if you ask someone who's like devoted their life and career to music, and you say, do you like music? The answer obviously should be yes.
Yeah.
But I think it almost never is.
No,
that it's way more complicated than that, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you ask somebody who works in any industry whether they like that industry, the answer probably isn't yes. It's like more complicated than that. And
because you've seen the underbelly, right? Like once you've seen every aspect of something, you tend to go, I get excited by it, right? Like that's how I feel about technology. I am very excited by technology. When I walk into a Best Buy, there's an inner kid that's screaming, go look down every aisle. As I look down that aisle, I have very strong opinions about what I'm seeing. You're like, I don't know that I love this anymore. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. But I think that's like that with anything that you dedicate your life to, right? Like you've just seen so many different things. It's interesting that they can pick that out, though.
Yeah. That was great, and it also like was a fun like intergenerational connection because we're talking about
for sure
connections. Is these kids are 19, 20, 21, and they're struggling with they're trying to wrap their minds around what it means to have music as a career, and it's like the same things that I was thinking about back then too, and I'm still thinking about now. Yeah,
I used to always say to people, I'm like, stick with it, you'll hate it later. Like.
Yeah.
What do you have any mentors that you can point to say like it really it put me in my frame of thought? Because I feel like you're very unique for a music teacher. Like you're thinking about things that no music teacher thinks.
That's really sweet of you to say. I have my advisor at in my PhD. Ian Quinn was extremely influential on me. He does a lot of similar things to what I do. Although he started from a more like pure mathematics perspective, it was like we can reduce everything in music to an equation, which isn't quite the same thing as like the computational stuff that I do, but it's sort of had that same
like a physics almost. Yeah.
And one thing that I like, one sentence that's influenced me more than anything else was that he said something to me. Was just because it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Yeah,
and like
that
really like has, because so often we are like driven towards interesting questions, or we're motivated to solve some sort of problem, and then there's multiple ways that we can do it, and we know that the best way is the hardest way, but there's other ways that we could do it. And just reminding myself all the time that just because something is hard doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it has been so like important to the way that I've I guess lived my life, like just and as a thinker and as a worker and as a dad, as a husband. That really, so it's funny because that has nothing to do with academia. It's just like about the way that you approach the world, like, and then just seeing him model that too was very very important.
Listen, style. I'm always interested in what like where style comes from, and like how we each have like uniquenesses that will impact somebody else. So that's why I always have people tell that story. But that's an amazing experience, and I think it's very true. You know, like just because it's hard, you should focus on maybe accomplishing it because nobody else has, right? So that look, the way that you think, some of the stuff that I was thumbing through in your book, and the way that you're applying your thought process to science and technology, and the way that a lot of it cross-pollinates with the stuff that I've been kind of preaching, is very amazing. I think everybody should go check out your book. For sure. I got to imagine being in your class is probably incredible, because I'm sure the kids are getting an experience that's totally different than any place else. No, I'm sure of it.
Some of them
way that I think. Some of them have to just complete it. You know,
number, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, Chris, I really appreciate you being on the podcast, man. Like, again, people should go check out your book, the music and data, or the music and the data. Certainly check out your book. I appreciate you coming on here and talking to me and appeasing, all the stupid questions that I might have. Is there anything else that we can bring up, or is there anything else that I can do for you to, take a shameless plug or something like that? Where can people find you?
Well, people can find me on Blue Sky and Twitter, X, threw up in my mouth a little bit there. But on all social media, I am Chris W.M. White, at Chris W.M. White. And which is also my website, chriswmwhite.com. I'm currently working on a book on music and AI, specifically on why AI is not a good fit for musical expression. The things that AI is good at are not the things that make music work. And I do it from a social perspective, from a interpretive perspective. The things that we value out of music are not what AI is good at creating. The ways that music is engineered is not the way that AI tends to be engineered. And so it's also like the way that both of those two things are put together don't kind of make them clash. And that's that's with my publisher now. It should be out in the next hopefully in the next year, hopefully in the next 6 months. The tentative title is Why AI's Music Sucks. The conflict between large language models and music. But we'll see whether that makes it through the
the editing process.
Through the editing.
Well, I will definitely be on the lookout for that, and I think everybody should take a look at your website and check you out. Again, thank you so much for being on here. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Tom. This is really fun.
Yeah, no problem. So for everybody listening, this is Cafe Technica, where we discuss high-tech issues and complex topics and try to boil them down to their simplicity and essence. And hopefully you heard in this conversation how much humanity is in science and technology. We look forward to putting on another episode for you and appreciate you tuning in. Thank you for listening.
Oops. Bye-bye.